Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado, joined by Kyle Buller. What's up, Kyle?
Hey, Joe.
Hey, so we wanted to do kind of a different style of episode today and kind of answer some questions that have been coming at us for a bit. And before we get to that, let's say, I guess, mention a few things. You're about to travel to California for the Korea conference to study some ketamine therapy, which is going to be pretty interesting. Then you're going to present about spiritual emergency in Atlanta. What's the name of that conference?
I always forget. It's the Association for Spiritually Transformative Experiences or something like that. I should really get that organization down. It's called ASSIST. So the American Center for Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences.
Great. That's going to be fun. You'll host a breakout session. You get to have a talk too. So that's great. And then we don't really have too many big things coming up, but we do plan to make some announcements soon. We're making plans right now for the rest of 2020. I'm going to be at a philosophy conference in Exeter, UK in April, and then also a psychedelic conference in Netherlands in April. And you'll probably be at the Psychedelic Freedom Summit.
Liberty Summit by Chacruna. So yeah, definitely check that out. Go to chacruna.net, check out the Psychedelic Liberty Summit. That's happening April 24th, I believe.
That seems right.
Yeah, definitely check that out. It seems cool. Talk about policy, decriminalization, and some of the law and policy things that are happening in the psychedelic movement. So I think it's the 24th and 25th, or at least that weekend, the 25th and 26th in San Francisco. So definitely check that out, guys.
Cool. Looks like I'll miss Bicycle Day in Denver for the first time in a little while.
Bummer.
Which, oh well. If I get to be in Europe, it's okay. And we've got a few classes ongoing, no upcoming live navigating psychedelics courses scheduled yet, but you'll hear about it. Get on our email list if you're not there yet, psychedelicstoday.com to sign up for that, and you'll be informed if you want to take Navigating Psychedelics live. And as always, regular Navigating Psychedelics is always available. You can get tons of pre-recorded content and get yourself educated. Anybody can benefit from it, doctor to a high school kid.
Yep.
It is all over the place and highly valuable, at times very technical, at times very simple.
And you can go through at your own pace, kind of whenever you want to. There's tons of master classes in there, tons of information, and you get the PDF downloads of the Trip Journal and Integration Workbook and some exercises. So yeah, definitely check that out.
Money back guarantee. If you don't like it, we'll give you a refund. It's okay. Just let us know. And lifetime access. Cool. So other things, this show's brought to you by Onnit, ONNIT. Go to onnit.com to check out what they've got. They've got tons of supplements, from mushroom stuff like cordyceps to just protein mixes, different drinks like coffee, chai drinks. All sorts of great supplements, from fish oil to, whatever, multivitamins. And with the code PSY today, you get 10% off your first order of everything except for fitness equipment. So if you're going to buy kettlebells, no 10% off for you, unfortunately. But everything else is great. I've been using their stuff for over 10 years, and I've loved everything I bought. So it's worth checking out, and it helps us out too. So check it out, onnit.com. Use the code PSY today at checkout for 10% off. And also Audible. I love Audible. I've been subscribed to Audible for ages, years and years now. So I can crank out at least a book a month on, with the subscription. Comes with one book a month, and you can get discounts on other books if you want more. So super amazing. The book by Mike J. Mescaline was one that just blew my socks off. I've also listened to stuff like Terrence McKenna on there. So True Hallucinations is on there. There's a book called Drugged by a chemistry professor, I think, or pharmacology professor in England. That was another extraordinary book I had on Audible. There's just so many, especially in the psychedelic space. So if you want a 30-day free trial, Go to psychedelicstoday.com/welcome, and you can find the 30-day free trial button there, and that helps us out quite a bit. So anything you can do to help, and you cancel your subscription at any time, so no risk to you. So check it out, and you get to keep the book.
Yep.
Again, psychedelicstoday.com/welcome. Cool. All right. I think that's it for now.
Yeah.
So we wanted to chat about a few things that people asked us about. I put a post up on Instagram. We got a whole mess of answers to what people want to hear about. And I guess before we do that, I wanted to address an issue that came up and was raised to us by a physician out of Fort Collins, Colorado, Dr. Craig Peacock, who works at, what's it called? The Wellness Center? Wholeness Center. Wholeness Center, which is Scott Shannon's there as well. Really cool situation they've got in Fort Collins, but I wanted to read Craig's response here just because I thought it was important. So in our episode, we talked about kratom and, made it sound like it was a free lunch. There's reasons to use kratom, but here's what Craig wanted us to kind of share. So here's Craig's intro. I'm a psychiatrist and addiction specialist in Fort Collins, Colorado, a co-therapist in the Phase 3 MDMA for PTSD study, and I do a lot of IV, IM, ketamine work with patients. I'm all for using psychedelics wisely. Kratom, however, is a totally different beast. Kratom is to opioids much like beer is to benzodiazepines. Not the same chemical, but with the same net effect. Beer and benzos do their thing on the GABA receptor. Opioids and kratom primarily affect the mu opioid receptor. Yes, beer is generally much safer than benzos, but it can be physically addictive and even wreck your life if you use it enough. Similarly, kratom is safer than opioids, but it can still be very physically addictive, and getting off of it is awful. Your speakers, this is the decriminalized nature of a podcast, I think out of Oregon. Your speakers claimed that kratom withdrawal is like coffee withdrawal. This is insane. They have no idea what they're talking about. Kratom withdrawal very closely imitates opioid withdrawal because kratom's primary activity is at the mu receptor. Here's what kratom withdrawal really looks like: diarrhea, abdominal cramps, severe insomnia and anxiety, restlessness and agitation, depression, and cognitive impairment. Kratom withdrawal looks and feels just like oxycodone withdrawal. Claiming otherwise is a public disservice and dishonest. So, Craig, thank you for this, and sorry it took us so long to get this out. If this is true, which it is, the receptor site activity is the same as opioid pills, so we've got to be really careful there. And addiction, while not lethal, becoming addicted and withdrawing from kratom can look really painful and awful, though it's not lethal. Beer and benzodiazepines, or alcohol and benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium, those are the two things where withdrawal is actually lethal. So, to be noted, kratom, the real reason to use kratom over pills is that you can't OD on the high end and die. You're not going to have that, respiration ceasing situation that happens with, how do I not know an opiate pill? Oxycodone or something like that. So yeah, be careful with kratom. It's not a free lunch. You can still get addicted and it can still hurt you. Used wisely, it's probably okay, but just be careful, learn what you need to learn before you do things. Yeah, and I think I even brought up on that specific episode, I know somebody who has been using kratom or kratom for a bit, and I mean, they tell me they struggle with trying to get off of it, and it's something that they really want to get off, and every time they try to do it, the withdrawal effects are pretty intense, and so like I'm seeing it, right? Like I see somebody kind of struggling with it as well, and they're using it as a alternative, and so yeah, I would definitely like to echo that is a real thing. I do have people in my life that do struggle with that, so be careful. Yeah, careful out there, folks. It's we want everybody to be healthier and smarter and happier. And addiction can definitely get in the way of that.
Yeah. And, you know, I guess it is like a harm reduction thing, right? Like you're not going to possibly die from it, which is good, right? But yeah, it does come with some risks.
Yeah. Like if you're trying to save money and get off pills, or like, you know, use it to avoid the withdrawals from heroin use or something, like that's perhaps okay. But, you know, I just probably don't use it every day. Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's jump into some of these questions. Where was that first one here?
So the first question that came on this Instagram thread was psychedelics and an exorcism. So not much of a question, more of kind of like a comment. But this is a super interesting question and comment of, I don't think I've really heard podcasts or anything kind of address this, of an exorcism during psychedelics, or maybe using psychedelics for an exorcism. Not really too sure what this question's asking, since it wasn't much of a question, more of a comment. But I guess we could take it in multiple different directions. You know, these states can occur during a psychedelic experience, and, you know, I'm curious whether or not psychedelics could be used for an exorcism, or, you know, or if it just comes up, right? So, and maybe how to navigate that if it does come up. You know, I'm thinking about like shamanic cultures and shamanic uses of plant medicines and psychedelics, and kind of with that idea of spiritual detoxing and purging. If we look at it from a shamanic perspective of, say, you know, there's hungry ghosts sometimes attached to us, and sometimes we need to try to get rid of that. And, you know, working in non-ordinary states can be a way to elicit, you know, or maybe exacerbate these states, like kind of get in there and make it bigger, maybe have it come to the surface a little bit more. So, you know, I could probably see psychedelics being an aid for that. Whether that's the way you want to go. And I guess it also kind of comes down to your cosmology and beliefs, whether you believe spirits can possess you, and whether you believe you can kind of get those out. You know, coming from the Christian background or shamanic background, yeah, that's definitely a thing, right? We can possibly get possessed by dark or demonic spirits. And then how do we work with that as well?
So, yeah. What do we do? Like, we want to talk about exorcisms. We're like, okay, what is that? Like, the concept is that something's inside of you, feeding off of you, making you do things you don't want to do. Like, you see the movies, like, the devil made me do it, or, you know, the spirits inside me made me do it. And then the exorcist comes over and does their thing. And, you know, this is a thing that the Catholic Church does. People don't totally realize it, but the Catholic Church has an organization that trains exorcists and has done that for hundreds and hundreds of years. So they're probably operating off of similar manuals, you know, than folks used in the 1200s, which is, you know, an interesting thought. What are these things? I like to often think of them as a metaphor. You know, saying what a thing is a little reductionist, right? Like, how do we turn... And this is something that John Cobb said to us when we recorded with him in February. David Bohm thought that we could solve a lot of problems by turning nouns into gerunds. So instead of me being Joe, I'm Joe Ing, or like Demon Ing. You know, you're just doing what that thing does, and it doesn't necessarily mean like what is this thing in itself. It's more like, what is this thing doing, and what is the process it's playing out? Right. So, you know, you and I had a kind of a weird, I don't know if I want to call it possession experience, but like we were exhausted for months after a situation we had. And it felt as though perhaps there was some sort of energy attachment or like entity attached to us. It took me a long time to get right. Yeah. I was really exhausted, and it was really ugly for a while. So, you know, that's one way that thing can play out. The other one is like the really stereotypical one where there's a child screaming on a bed, acting as though Satan is speaking through the person. It could be a very different voice or face. Like, do you have this quote from Stan Groff up? Like, this is one of the things that made me most interested in Stan Groff at an early age, was this particular story.
Yeah, he doesn't explain it in this book that I have. I think it's in another book, but he does kind of go through it, and I can read part of it. Or maybe we could go over that story first, and then I can go through
let's do a rough sketch.
How to work with demonic energy and holotropic breath work.
Right. So we had a client in Prague, an LSD psychotherapy client, trauma and addiction. I don't know too much more than that. And the client began to present as though telepathic things were happening, and facial structure changed quite a bit, and total body positioning changed a lot. So the body of the client presented as though it was the devil or something like that. And I don't know, any more details that you remember?
I think thinking back to Stan's story, yeah, all that. But then the strange thing that happened was that this client started I think their voice got deeper, and then started to describe things about Stan that she would have no idea. And that's, I think, what kind of freaked Stan out, was like, this client was starting to talk about his life and just, start spewing some facts about him that how would she know that? Like, there must be something going on, or some sort of entity that might be transmitting information through her. And I think that really freaked him out from reading that story of like, what's going on here? How does this person know all this stuff about my life, or these certain aspects of my life, or about me that I didn't tell her that. And so during that experience, I remember he said he kind of took in a meditative role and imagined white light kind of surrounding him, and I think her as well, kind of like in a loving presence, and trying to put up boundaries for himself, like this person or this energy can't penetrate me or affect me in a way. So using some sort of visualization type of thing, or maybe some kind of magical, quote unquote, magical thinking of, I'm putting up this barrier, and this energy can't attach to me. And so from that story, Stan kind of created this container where he's protecting himself, but also trying to give some energy to this client to work through the stuff that was coming up.
Right. So the way I've always conceptualized it is Stan had this process already kind of existing for how to work with folks in these states. And he just, in a sense, I don't recall the meditation thing with the white light, but Stan had this container already, safe space, and just kept doing what he was doing, and it worked itself out. As soon as he would get scared and show the client that he was scared, that's when it would have all really fallen apart. Even if the client could feel it a little bit, like, it probably would have fed the situation. So, Stan, by holding strong, doing a little meditation perhaps, and then moving forward, really allowed him to help this client. The client went on to heal and not be addicted to, whatever it was. You said you had the section written down. So this is in When the Impossible Happens.
I think, yeah, there's a story in The Impossible Happens. So Stan said, I've observed during my entire professional career can be found in the book When the Impossible Happens, specifically, quote, the interview with the devil, case with Flora. So if you want to check that out, I believe that's the story. And I think it was also in a couple of his other books as well.
Yeah, for sure. Because I read about it in Holographic Universe, and that was out way before When the Impossible Happened. So yeah, he definitely has written about this in the past. Yeah. I would guess LSD psychotherapy, just like you did earlier.
Yep. And this stuff does come up sometimes in psychedelic sessions and breathwork sessions. And so in the holotropic breathwork book, for those who might be looking or watching the video of this, there's actually a section in here for working with quote unquote demonic energy. And Stan says, what it is. It's usually associated with reliving of memories of severe emotional and physical abuse, or of traumas that brought the individual to the threshold of death, such as a very difficult birth. As the emotional and physical expression of the breathers increase in intensity, they suddenly undergo a profound qualitative change. The first indication that this might be happening is a change in the breather's facial and vocal expression, which becomes strange and uncanny. Their voice is deep and raspy. Their eyes assume evil expression. Their face cramps up in a quote-unquote mask of evil. Spastic contractions make their hands look like claws, and their entire body tenses. So that's what that could look like in psychedelic or breathwork sessions. And, you know, in breathwork sessions, you know, you just have normal sitters sitting with that. So, oh my God, what do you do when that happens, right? So yeah, you know, you'd want a facilitator to come over. And so he goes on to say, once it's understood that we are dealing with demonic energy, we reassure the breather that we feel comfortable working with it and that we have ample experience doing it. The general strategy in this situation is to encourage the breather to fully express the alien energy with grimaces, sound, and body movements, and really encourage the breather to say, like, show us what it looks like, show us what the sound looks like, or what it sounds like, express it fully, really fully with your whole body. And that's pretty typical of working with people with breath work and body work. Like towards the end, if something's coming up or it feels like somebody's stuck in a process, I mean, that's what we would typically do, is really just hold that container for that person to really express what's going on. So if it does look somewhat demonic, you know, really encourage them to explore it and to really kind of get it out of their system. And, you know, sometimes people can all of a sudden have huge strengths of energy, right? Or just like, you know, increase energy and strength when that happens. So you definitely want to be sure that you're creating a safe container for yourself as a facilitator or sitter, as well as so the person going through this experience feels safe as well. And yeah, Stan goes on to say the emotional and physical energy released during this work can reach an extraordinary intensity. The breather can muster physical strength that by far exceeds their everyday muscular power. This unusual phenomenon can also be observed during grand mal epileptic seizures, occurring after the application of electroshock or spontaneously. However, the demonic energy is not stereotypical or robotic, as in the case of the seizures, but acts in a versatile, intelligent, and goal-oriented fashion. Its actions are wicked, aggressive, and they are aimed at the breather's helper or against the breather themselves. So that's something also to take into consideration if you're working with this, the kind of the projections that might come up, you know, like this energy or this quote unquote entity saying like, get the fuck away from me, or like, you know, might be spouting things at you or possibly trying to hurt you in some sense.
Right. So you as the facilitator might feel pretty at risk. But the trick is to reassure yourself that you've got adequate training and preparation and support for these kinds of situations as they come up. And you know, this is something that you thought might happen eventually with one of your clients. So, you know, you roll the dice long enough, something like this might happen. So just being ready for it. So my problem with the way we're talking about it is that it's saying it is demonic energy or it is, you know, alien energy. How about like it feels as though it's an external thing, and it feels as though it's evil, or it feels as though it's alien, right? Like in my ayahuasca experience, I had the experience of an evil entity coming over me and checking me out and saying, look, okay, like, who are we going to feed you to, kind of thing. And it felt external. I'm not going to go ahead and say, okay, like for sure this was XYZ entity that I read about in these books on demonology.
Right.
I'm going to say like it, this is how it presented. We have to be as, facilitators and interested parties in this stuff, really careful about the language we use. If we want to say that, is something like maybe say like couch it in the language, like my tradition says this.
Mm-hmm.
According to my tradition, it looks more like this XYZ thing, like hungry ghost. Like that's kind of like a Buddhist term. So how do we like interact with that term in a contextually appropriate way? I guess. So, I'm just cautioning people, be careful with your language. I'm always a little, perhaps too careful with my language, but we don't know what these things are yet.
Yeah.
Like they don't show up on any of our devices that we can use to scan things yet.
Right.
Maybe they will.
Right.
But
well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point, right? And I think it kind of comes back to maybe how you're experiencing it or part of your belief system. Like, sometimes the way I've viewed some of these demonic type of states was kind of through that shamanic lens and through the work of like Martin Prachtel talking about these hungry ghosts, like these leftover ancestors that kind of come back into our lives and kind of take on, they feed off of us and then, they want our energy. Maybe they haven't crossed over. And how are we working with, say, like these ancestors that just want some attention, right? Or maybe need some healing or some offerings. And then here you have in Stan's book, he's talking about it's associated with reliving memories of severe emotional and physical abuse or traumas, right? And so I think there can be multiple ways to look at this type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, being a little flexible, because you don't know that the way you're going to talk to something is going to be relatable to your client. Mm-hmm. Being careful with your language in this context is the same as meeting your client where they're at too. Yeah. It's not separate.
Right. And that's a good point of like, okay, we have our ideas and how are we not projecting that onto the person's experience? Because the person that is experiencing this, I mean, it's their experience, right? And so how do we create that container for the client or the breathwork participant to fully experience that through their lens? And how can we create that safe container for them to work with that energy that's coming up? Depending on how they're defining it, I think is really important versus us saying this looks demonic and we need to do an exorcism on you. I mean, that could feel really invasive, right? Maybe that's not what they're going through. Maybe that's what it looks like they're going through, but then that's our kind of vocabulary or frame of reference for working with that. I could feel like that could be really traumatizing. Somebody's reliving some sort of physical abuse and it might look quote unquote demonic. And then we come in and think, oh, we need to extract this energy or this demon out of them when really they're kind of going through something totally different. So yeah, I think the caution there is like, how do we show up and meet that client where they're at or that participant where they're at and really create that container for them to explore their experience.
So yeah, and don't try to do an exorcism on somebody. I'll just put it that way. Don't do that.
Right. If you don't have training for that, don't do that.
And who does? Yeah. Catholic priests.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that many other people do. And, even their training, I have doubts about. Mm-hmm. It's really highly ritualistic. It doesn't necessarily take the human into account, as far as I know. And imagine if somebody had a rape history and you kind of force them into this exorcism scenario. No go. Don't do that. Like, that's not pretty.
So this is definitely an interesting topic. I feel like it's semi-rare. Like, I haven't seen too much of it in breathwork sessions or anything like that. But it's definitely a possibility in like psychedelic experiences, kind of energies emerging. And yeah, how are we dealing with that? Right. Yeah, kind of coming back, could psychedelics be effective for releasing this energy? I always come back to that that Groff quote of non-specific amplifiers of mental processes. If there is something that's just deep inside of us that's trying to come up to be resolved, working in holotropic states of consciousness can foster that potential for release, right? And so,
yeah, absolutely. Like I've seen some stuff that hints at exorcism. I've never seen something that looks like exactly like it to me. So yeah, for what it's worth. All right. I think we beat that one to death. Let's go to the next one. So what do we got here?
Did you want to...
Can we speak briefly to cluster headaches?
Yeah.
All right. Cluster headaches, treating cluster headaches with psychedelics. So this is something that many of you might know about. There's an organization called Cluster Busters out there that has been spearheading the research on this for a long time. I've read 1 or 2 studies on treating cluster headaches with psychedelics. It's not a silver bullet. LSD works for some just as good as like the normal oxygen treatments work for others. So some people, psychedelics aren't going to work for, but I think it was a greater, I forget the numbers, but it was a really substantial number of people with cluster headaches were able to not have cluster headaches for a long period of time after a macro dose of psychedelics. A gentleman I know here in Breckenridge treats his cluster headaches with mushrooms. He eats about 1/8 at a go, so 3.5 grams, and he does that about once a quarter. So, and then there's folks that use LSD. I don't know if people are investigating phenethylamines like mescaline, but that would be interesting to see. I don't know. What are you hearing about cluster headaches?
Yeah, I mean, this has been one of those issues that have been explored in research with psychedelics. I personally know some people, I don't know if they would consider having cluster headaches, maybe just like very, very severe migraines who have used psilocybin to treat that. And it worked, and kind of repetitive dosing, right? Like they take a high dose or maybe around like 3.5 grams or around that 3 to 5 grams maybe. And having some relief with their headaches for, a few weeks to a few months and then having to revisit that again. And so, yeah, I've been wanting to get, I think, what's his name? Brandon from Cluster Busters on the show.
Patrick. Yeah, Brandon Patrick.
Yeah, for a while. So hopefully we can get him on the show to talk about this a little bit more in depth. But yeah, I've definitely known people that have had, this issue and, we're able to get relief. But, if you're somebody that suffers, definitely do your research before diving into this. And, I think there was a German researchers that were trying to create a LSD derivative. I forget what it was called, bromo something. But it was like a LSD molecule without the psychedelic effects. So trying to find a treatment that would, bind to the receptors, do something physiologically, and hopefully to treat that. I'm not too sure where they're at with that. But
I hope it keeps on going.
Yeah.
So the way I model this is, if you start with a migraine, we know a lot more about migraines than cluster headaches, but migraines are, the neurons begin to misfire in your brain, leading to a sort of electrical storm, quote unquote. And this abnormal electric activity can really trigger a lot of migraines and migraine type symptoms like auras. And perhaps what's happening is that the psychedelics will correct that by that hyperconnectivity between the brain networks or nodes, and then over time, like due to the wildly intense interconnection, you would then just as a normal person with depression or PTSD would slip back into kind of the normal brain state. This is kind of the model that Dr. David Nichols presented at the Telluride Mushroom Festival, and I really liked his language. It's kind of, after the hyperconnectivity, your brain goes back to its natural state. And this could be the thing that's helping folks with migraines. We need a lot more data, but that's how I model it for me.
Yeah. So that compound that I was referring to is called 2-bromo lysergic acid diethylamide, so 2-bromo LSD. So non-hallucinogenic.
Are they studying it actively?
I believe so. So this is up on Beckley. I think this was back in 2011. So trying to see whether or not this could help with cluster headaches. I'm sure if you do some research on that, you can find out more where they're at with the research for 2-bromo LSD.
Cool. Yeah, I'm seeing here that it was being researched in the 70s and elsewhere. Hopefully people pick that back up and go for it. Cool. What's next here?
Did you want to talk about how psilocybin mushrooms? How can psilocybin mushrooms be standardized in production for therapeutic purpose?
Right. So yeah, how can they be standardized? It's an amazing question. And there's no great answer other than a lot more research. The practical solution is to have a large quantity of Psilocybe cubensis mushroom dried and powdered and have it, really, really, really mixed well. And that theoretically would be standardized. It's not super standardized, but it's far better than just throwing a couple mushrooms in your mouth, because you could have 2 or 3 duds in your set of mushrooms or whatever. We know that, a mushroom 2 inches away from another mushroom could be wildly different in potency. So super important to understand that. There's potency difference between strains. There's potency difference between species. So, staying, for an individual grower or underground therapist, sticking with a particular strain and method of growing and then a method of standardizing, that would lead to a pretty high level of certainty over time. It's good. Okay, we've been doing this for 8 years. We've never had a failure. So, this seems to be pretty consistent. We're drying them properly. We're not letting, the moisture decay the levels of psilocybin in there. So, yeah. So that's really it. I have heard that people are looking at very high-tech ways of standardizing, but that's not at scale yet, and people aren't really doing that to the best of my knowledge.
Right. Yeah, I guess it is tricky with the variance in percentage of psilocybin and psilocin. I mean, that's where the medical model does really well, right? Synthetic psilocybin, you kind of know what you're getting. But yeah, maybe this question was more oriented towards, fungi versus synthetic. But yeah, I think...
Right. When you compare the two, it's tough.
Yeah.
Like, what you're getting with 25 milligrams of pharmaceutically pure psilocybin. You don't know what you're getting with 2.5 grams of cubensis mushrooms. It's, I would probably most of the time rather eat mushrooms, even though you're going to have that variance. But, who's to say if this pure psilocybin was available on the street, who's to say I wouldn't eat that more regularly than mushrooms? I can't, unless it's an option. I can't really say.
Right.
And I'd have to have personal experience to know if I like one over the other. There are people doing extracts of cubensis mushrooms. I don't know exactly how they're doing it. I've heard people are doing the CO2 blast extraction method, like with cannabis. I've also heard people are doing Everclear extractions. I'm not a chemist. I don't pretend to play one on TV, but do your research if you're going to do that kind of thing. I don't really know. But with an extract, you'd have potentially less decay of the molecule, potentially, and a more standardized dose because you don't have so much plant material in the mix.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But I guess if you're just sticking to plant material, coffee grinder, and really kind of trying to make that a little bit more consistent. But again, it can vary from batch to batch, right? So, yeah.
Which is why you want to homogenize a huge batch. And we had somebody tell us recently about freeze drying. So if you grow and then freeze dry, that's a great way to make sure you have near zero loss. Yeah. So got one here, psychedelics and athletic performance, that I'd like to jump in on. So this one was from Kevin Watley. So thank you, Kevin. So I used to ask a lot of questions like this coming up in the holotropic breathwork world, like how could holotropic breathwork help my snowboarding or rock climbing or whatever, or my kung fu? I wasn't even practicing kung fu, so don't know what I was thinking. But really, it comes down to, perhaps there are psychological blocks that are getting in the way of you attaining peak performance for your genome in psychology. And there could be energetic blocks. There could be emotional things like a trauma from the past getting in the way. And on the other side, you could find out that perhaps athletic performance is a distraction from what you're really here to do. So
what do you mean by that?
Like a bait and switch. Like, oh, I'm playing football, or like I'm a track runner, but perhaps I'm really here on Earth to go do mission work in Haiti or to become a musician,
right.
Or I'm not spending any time with my family because of all this athletic stuff. Maybe I really need to stop sports or reframe my focus on sports to do these other things that are more important to me personally.
Right.
And athletes have a lot of dysfunctional behavior. We know that. So perhaps the psychedelics would show us the bad behavior and we might want to sort ourselves out.
Well, that's interesting.
Like we saw this MMA fighter who's now a pygmy advocate and activist. He just did years in the UFC and then quit. And now he's helping out pygmies in Africa, which is amazing.
Yeah. I was even just going to comment on my own experience of being super into snowboarding, wanting to move out to Colorado in my early 20s to be a ski bum and just ride the mountains. I was thinking about going out to school for mountain operations just so I could be on the mountains constantly. And I got this message. It was like, snowboarding's a hobby. It's fun. You almost died once during it. You can definitely hurt yourself again. And you're here to do something else. And that's actually how I got more into the psychology realm and wanting to do that. I think there's something there, Joe.
Right. It's worth carefully considering. I noticed a new Instagram the other day, psychedelics for athletes or something like that. They've commented on a bunch of our stuff. And I was like, that's an interesting angle. But what do we do? Sports are a great way to cover up our emotions. Look at the amount of time people spend watching NFL games. It's incredible. And is it in service of you improving your life situation? Potentially not, though.
Right.
You got to look at it really carefully.
Yeah. And to also go back to this topic, if you're interested in learning more about psychedelics and, fitness and, sports, definitely go back and check out some of our other episodes. We get into this with Ben Eddy, talk about psychedelics and, what was that? MMA, what type? Jiu-jitsu. And then we also had on Shane LeMaster a few times to talk about microdosing and martial arts. And I don't know if we had anybody else to talk about some of this stuff. But another topic that you brought up too, Joe, reminded me about that fitness panel I was on, psychedelics and fitness, or psychedelic and exercise. And just the way that psychedelics or breath work can help us tap into our emotional body. And you're talking about how traumas could help, block movement, so how could we even maybe use that to get in touch with our bodies in a certain way? How we're moving, can we work with some of that energy in our body, noticing? And I'll give a shout out to Tim, who's really into movement and trauma and how trauma can help limit things. And how do we work with our body in a way that's actually beneficial, that's actually not doing more damage, and how could psychedelics or breath work help us tap more into that emotional body and understand how we're moving, where we are holding trauma, how can we work with that. So that's a totally interesting topic. It'd actually be fun to try to get Tim on at some time to chat more about his work.
That's actually a great idea,
Yeah.
because he works with people all the time on this topic. Actually know of a person who works in Manhattan doing like he's an underground guide, but also a fitness trainer, and does this kind of body work and retraining called Postural Restoration. So he's like coming from kind of a trauma informed way when working with people in his athletic training environment, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there. Yeah, that would be really cool to get Tim on.
Yeah.
I've got another one here. So how to get the ball rolling in an area. Check-ins on the area currently decriminalized, pros, cons, tips for presenting the topic. So start a club. Like if you're in the US or Canada or Europe, you have the political freedom to start a small organization and just do little meetups at a coffee shop or wherever. You could work through books together. You can lobby the government if you chose to, or even put in a ballot initiative. But getting started with meeting regularly is the real trick. Maybe you start with once a month, and you just talk about the latest episode of Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia or Psychedelics Today, even. There's a lot to talk about once you've listened to an episode of our show, or watch somebody else. There's just so much. There's this is actually interesting. Check-ins on the areas currently decriminalized. So we've got Denver and Oakland. I don't think anywhere else has really passed yet. There was chatter in Chicago about Chicago, but it didn't look like that went very far. Or all the way to the end.
Yeah.
We're still watching it.
Yeah, the resolution
remember
just passed, which didn't mean it turned into a law and ordinance. So it still has to pass like another round of voting, I believe. So I think it just meant that it passed to get voted on. But I mean, passed pretty good. I mean, 50-0. That's huge. So, I think there's a lot of excitement with that number, 50-0, and how it just kind of, that resolution got through. And so I think there is a lot of hope there that Chicago could be the next city for decriminalization.
Yeah. So I've been kind of incubating a club in Phoenix, and that's been really cool. I've been a little negligent of the club in my hometown just because I work too much. But I really want to get on that and probably start with monthly meetings. Really, it's just a way to get new friends and learn what other people are up to and interested in. And it's great for harm reduction too, because you can bounce ideas off of each other. Like how can I be a little safer here? Mm-hmm. Or can I borrow your test kit? Something like that.
Yeah.
You got to be really careful though, because you will never know who's a cop or not.
Right.
It's a really unfortunate state of affairs that we find ourselves in. But just be very careful that there could be police out there. And there are police in psychedelic clubs in the United States. Like we could probably say that we have certainty on that. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't they be there? Known drug users coming together to talk about using drugs.
Right. So yeah, I think that's a word of caution to stay within the legal, framework, right? Like if you start a club, make sure the participants that are showing up, make sure you're enforcing like some guidelines of no selling, no referrals and stuff like that, because that could put your club or group at risk. So yeah, just really be careful out there. But organizing is a great way to get things moving, right? Like getting people together, chatting about this stuff. Maybe you do feel like you want to make it some sort of like initiative and get things rolling, advocate within mental health agencies. I mean, there's so many different ways, but I think that first part is getting people together, right? I think there's that idea of power in numbers. How do we get people organized and kind of go out there and try to take some action? So.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to see more clubs pop up. Psychedelic Club is an organization that can help you figure out how to get started. So just Google Psychedelic Club and you can get there. I had another one documented here. This is kind of one that we've not exactly beat to death, but close. So 5-MeO DMT, the toad, Sonoran desert toad. I've got the shirt on right now from Cream. Preservation protection. So first real question here. Is there a humane or conservative way to harvest the toad without disrupting its habitat and being too much? Yes, roadkill. So you just drive around those roads and pick them up off the road after they've been killed. If you touch a living one, there's a chance you'll be doing harm. You don't even really have to pick up the toad, just touch it to transmit harmful fungus to the toad. It's not going to say every time you touch the toad, you're going to transmit harmful fungus, but that's where it starts. It's the same thing with a cold or a flu to another human, right? It's like touch, proximity. And is the poison / medicine worth it? According to the data, there's no real difference between 5-MeO DMT from a toad or from a synthetic source, meaning a chemist built it out of molecules. I'm told it's relatively easy to make from melatonin that you buy at the store. I'm not a chemist. I wish I was. But yeah, that's, the biggest thing you can do to not harm the toads is to not go where they are. If they're in your backyard, that's a different story, but perhaps don't chase them down. There's a lot of people really pushing right now for in-home harvesting. So you capture a few toads and they're your source forever, or figure out how to breed them. I don't know. It's a really tough thing to bring a wild animal into your home. Reptiles, not so neurologically complex, but that's something everybody's going to have to figure out on their own.
Right.
It's a tough one. Do you have any thoughts on the toad subject? I know we've talked about that a ton.
Yeah, we have talked about it a ton. No, I would love to get Dr. Alan Davis on here at some point to chat about his work. He presented at Horizons about this topic as well, and some of the research that they were doing with 5-MeO, and they're the ones that also, did the research on synthetic versus, toad secretion. So, I don't have any other opinions other than what we've talked about.
Be careful out there. There's cult leaders. Just be careful. If you want to know more, there's a Facebook group called Beware of the Bufo Gangsters. You can learn a lot more there.
Toad isn't vegan.
Yes, that's great. So here's another one, Kyle. You might be able to speak to this one. Have you ever covered psychedelics and their ability to help with grief? So perhaps processing grief, you could speak to that and how psychedelics might help.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I guess when I think of grief, I also think about trauma too, right? Because why are we grieving? Could be something like death of a loved one, which could be trauma, right? It's not like a big trauma. But it's traumatic, right? Dealing with death. And, a lot of the research is showing that psychedelics, especially like MDMA, can be really beneficial for treating trauma. And I think just, even when we're dealing with stuff like breath work, right? Just to have a technique or tool to emotionally process the things that we're going to. I mean, I love going to breath work and just being able to somatically purge out whatever the hell I'm holding on to, or just sitting there and being able to breathe through my emotions and to cry, right? I mean, sometimes there's been times where I haven't been able to do that, and just creating that container to do that is so helpful. And I remember I had a session when I was younger, and I had a sitter with me, and I just looked at them and I said, "Is it okay if I cry right now?" And they had no experience with this stuff, so they thought, that's kind of a weird question. And I just sat there and cried and was grieving all this stuff, and just creating that container to do a lot of that emotional cleansing work was just so beneficial. So, there's not a lot of research about grief in particular, but I just think about the research with like trauma and depression and, just what's going on in mental health and psychedelics. Because I think, grief's a part of life, and how do we, I think about also with grief, as I mentioned a lot, I really like this guy, Martin Prachtel. He came out with a book called The Smell of Rain on Dust, and it's all about grief and praise and how to really praise life and how to grieve for life as well. And sometimes psychedelics can show us that, right? Like when we get in touch with this numinous dimension and we're able to maybe enter into these states where we feel so much love for the universe or love for ourselves and love for others, and being able to really praise that, I think that's also a form of grief in a sense, or processing grief in a way, right? Like we hold on to all this stuff that might have happened to us or these traumas, and then coming to some sort of resolution to feel like, oh, okay, I get why this might be happening, or I'm able to process it differently. So yeah, I definitely see that there's a huge potential there. Or even thinking about like the psilocybin research with death, right? I mean, thinking about people with terminal illness, and they're coming to end of life, that anxiety, right? It's almost like you're going through your own process of grieving your own life and praising your own life as well. Kind of, we know that psychedelics can potentiate mystical experiences or occasion mystical experiences. And sometimes in those mystical experiences can be somewhat like of life reviews and kind of going through certain things. What did I do? And, oh, that was really beautiful. Or, ooh, that wasn't too great, of whatever was coming up, and I'm able to kind of cry and process that. So, I think the real potential here with any holotropic state of consciousness is that idea of the inner radar, picking things up and doing this in a setting where you're creating a setting to process emotions, right? So I think there's huge potential there. You have any thoughts?
I think you did pretty good.
Thanks.
It's just a thing that accelerates your processing. Yeah. So if you've got, it might not feel good to accelerate grief processing, but, perhaps it is.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do a thing where if I knew I had something to process like that grief, I would put on like wildly sad music and like try my best to get it out.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, it always happened on the highway, but probably not the best place to be processing grief, but right. That's where I would do it.
Yeah. And even like when I think about like what Martine wrote about in this book, how like our culture has a really hard time grieving for things and praising life. It's almost like when grief becomes too quote unquote manic, we view that as a bad thing. So for example, he wrote about like when in his Mayan community where he lived, people would just be out in the streets just like collapsing in tears and screaming when somebody like a loved one died. And, that was their process to the tears, and just the emotion coming out from that cosmology is helping that spirit go onward. And so one of his students did this, who lives in America, and I think one of their family members died. And so at the funeral, he was really trying to grieve the loss of this family member, broke down, was crying, was kind of like, just all over the place, really trying to get it out of the body, right? And the result of that was the rest of the family around called 911, had an ambulance come, and that person was hospitalized.
Oh my God.
So in our culture, we just don't have the container to really grieve, right? Like it's that emotion just seems so overwhelming for a lot of people, where it's like, you're not going to get through this. This looks like this is too much for your nervous system, which sometimes that is, right? Sometimes when we really activate the nervous system like that, it's really not that beneficial. But I think there's also this idea that, yeah, our culture doesn't really contain grief really well. We kind of internalize it. We kind of say, shut up. Like, it's always so interesting, like going to funerals and stuff, and you see people that are like really grieving, and then a lot of people kind of keep it in and wait till afterwards, or kind of do it when they're alone, versus more of this like community oriented thing. Like really being okay with letting yourself break down in front of other people. and having that community to sit there and support you.
Trying to come up with the term in Judaism where people come together as a family and sit at home to think about it. Yeah, I'm looking at all these Hebrew terms and I'm not getting it. But yeah, essentially everybody that loved the person or the direct family will sit in a house for, multiple days and grieve. And I like that because it's like intentionally setting the time aside for grieving. It's not just a funeral. It's not just a wake.
Right.
It's like, this is time dedicated to grieving and processing it, and it lasts for days. So I think that, in our modern world, that's a pretty good scenario. But it takes time.
Yeah.
Like you can't really rush it.
Yeah.
If someone gets stuck though, like I've seen people grieving their pets for 7 years and keep coming to breath work, and it's important to keep going, but at a certain point, like why is it stuck, and should I try another method or intervention? Maybe after a year of breath work isn't getting it, maybe you try something else. I don't know what, but
well, that's a really great point too, of like not rushing the process, right? I think it's really important to stick with that process and not just try to push it aside, right? Like really kind of create time for that, and if it continues to unfold, like stick with that because it's important.
Absolutely. So maybe we're good to wrap here.
Yeah, we're at an hour. I mean, there's tons more questions that we could answer, and maybe we'll do another question Q&A episode to go through more of these because some of them are interesting. I know one that we wanted to touch on that we didn't get time to is the effects of derealization and depersonalization on psychedelics, and I think that's a really important topic to touch on.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, and I absolutely think we should touch that. Cool. Again, thank you all for listening. Really appreciate it. Best thing you can do for us is to tell a friend about the show. If you want to go further, leave a review on iTunes or Facebook. We would love it. Really helps us get better or bigger names in the field. And, maybe someday we can get Michael Pollan on if we get enough reviews on iTunes, but it's, not hold my breath. Anyway, this episode is brought to you by Onnit, onnit.com, where you can find all sorts of supplements and clothes and food products, really neat, healthy food choices. I love their coffee. I've had multiple of their kind of powdered chai drinks. I've had their Shroom Tech Sport to help with athletic performance, and their New Mood, which was initially a kind of ecstasy supplement, like when you're coming off of MDMA, it helped, but it helps every day too. Just keeps your brain flush with all of the materials it needs to be healthy. So use the code SciToday at onnit.com, onnit.com for 10% off your order, everything but fitness equipment like weights and stuff. So check it out, onnit.com. And Audible. Have you picked up anything on Audible lately?
Yeah, I've been listening to the Mike J book on mescaline. So
hell yeah.
A nice walk the other day, walked about like a couple miles, put the headphones on, listened to a bunch of it. It's awesome so far. That's what I love about audiobooks and podcasts. It's, you just walk around and kind of do your stuff and listen to it.
I very rarely have it in me to sit down and be still, unless I'm having an in-depth conversation like this. So yeah, audiobooks have allowed me to really expand my mind quite a bit more than I would have been able to otherwise. So that Mike J book on mescaline is amazing. I actually just emailed him today again. Hope to get him on soon. And I just completed a series of early Plato, which is really cool. It's not Play-Doh, but Plato, like the philosopher. And Lenny is having Kyle and I dig deep into Greek philosophy. It's a sort of finishing school. So expect to hear a lot more about that. We're going to dig in on the pre-Socratic soon. Unfortunately, I have to read it physically, but with Plato, I will certainly be listening. And I'm probably going to listen to it 3 times over, to be honest, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. So again, thanks Audible. You can get a free trial, 30-day trial, no risk, cancel whenever you want, and you get to keep the book. Comes with one free book. Go to psychedelicstoday.com/welcome, and you can find the link there.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to throw out?
And if anybody's interested in some integration coaching, integration services, definitely reach out. psychedelicstoday.com, go to services and click the psychedelic integration coaching. And so be happy to support you, whether you're about to go on a retreat or enter on this journey, and then support you after you return. Work with the experience afterwards, set some goals, break down your experience, and learn how to move the experience forward in your life. So if you're interested in doing any sort of coaching or individual work, reach out. We're here to support you. Again, psychedelicstoday.com, and then go click the service tab and look at the coaching application there. Just fill that out, and then we'll get back to you.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. Let's close her up. Joe Moore, Kyle Buller signing off for Psychedelics Today. See you on the next episode.